While harvesting his crops, Farmer Stephen discovered a massive, strange ball half his size hidden among the produce. Its sudden appearance in his field was baffling. However, as Stephen inspected the ball, he realized its true identity, which sent him running for his life. When Stephen first spotted this strange ball in his field, he didn't think much of it. However, when he realized that it was ruining his crops, he was determined to find out what it was and how it got on his field. So he decided to break it open. He grabbed some tools and started chipping away. It took him a while, but when he finally saw what was inside this ball, he couldn't stop himself from screaming. He dropped everything from his hands and ran away as fast as he could. This was dangerous. He needed to get away from this thing as quickly as possible. The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. He had so many questions, and he was determined to find the answer to each and every one of them. What had he seen inside this ball, and why did it make him scream? And how did this ball even end up on his field in the first place? Stephen smiled as he looked outside through his kitchen window. He was enjoying a nice cup of tea after lunch, and he stared at his fields, abundant with crops, ready to be harvested. Stephen took pride in the fact that he still did all of his work by himself. He was old enough to retire. He had been for years, but he didn't want to think about it. It was heavy work, that was true, but Stephen didn't mind. He enjoyed working outside and using his hands, and he got bored if he sat inside too long. He might be a bit slower than the competing farmers, but over the years, he had built an extensive base of loyal customers who kept coming back to him that it didn't matter a lot. His competitors were younger farmers about half his age who used the most advanced technology and, therefore, worked a lot faster. However, Stephen had simply decided not to worry about them. As long as he had his own customers and his crops were healthy, everything was fine. Unfortunately for him, one of those factors was about to change and take a turn for the worse. After Stephen finished his lunch, he gathered all of the tools that he needed for the harvest and headed out to the fields. However, when he got there, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. In the middle of his field, there was a huge ball about half his size. He had no idea what it was or how it had gotten there. Stephen looked around, trying to find any possible explanation for how this ball could have suddenly appeared on his field, but everything else looked completely normal. There was nothing unusual about his field except for this gigantic ball. He carefully approached it to take a closer look at it, but he had no idea what it was. Not yet. He knocked on the ball a couple of times and looked for a way to open it up, but he became none the wiser. If he wasn't a farmer, he might even have thought that it was some sort of crop. It kind of looked like a giant, deformed pumpkin. Stephen, however, did not grow pumpkins, and he was truly very confused by this thing. He decided that whatever this thing was, he needed to remove it off his fields. It was too heavy for him to pick up, so he needed to find another way to do it, and he took his time thinking of a plan. He had no idea yet that the sooner he got this ball off of his field, the better, but he would find out soon enough. Farmer Stephen eventually decided he was going to roll the ball off of his field. It was too heavy to lift or place onto a cart, and he did not feel like ringing any friends to help him. The afternoon sun was high, casting long shadows that danced around him as he sized up the challenge ahead. With a deep breath, he braced himself against the sphere, feeling its odd texture beneath his palms. So, he rolled up his sleeves and started pushing the ball, slowly rolling it away. At first, it seemed impossible, but Stephen was no stranger to hard work. His arms ached with the effort, yet there was something satisfying about making progress. The ball began to move more easily than he anticipated, almost as if it was eager to be moved from its resting place. Stephen noticed that it was going well and less heavy than it looked. He was glad about that. A sense of accomplishment began to fill him as he watched the ball roll further away from his precious crops. He paused momentarily, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, marveling at how the situation seemed to be turning in his favor. He quickly noticed that there was a strange smell coming from the ball. This made him even more confused, but he didn't think much of it. The scent was faintly chemical, out of place among the natural smells of earth and growth. Stephen wrinkled his nose and decided to ignore it. He had a job to finish, and no odd smell would stop him now. Stephen did not worry about the strange ball, and he continued to push and roll it away. He rolled it through his entire field until he finally came to the edge of the field where no crops were growing anymore. There, the ground sloped gently downwards, leading to a small forgotten patch of land bordered by the dense thicket of woods that marked the edge of Stephen's property. Once Stephen had pushed the ball off his field, he simply left it there and continued his work in the field. The day's tasks were far from over, and Stephen threw himself back into the rhythm of his chores with the dedication of a man who knew no other way. The sun's relentless heat didn't make things any easier, but Stephen was no stranger to hard work under the blazing sky. The sun was shining brightly, and it was quite hot all day. He was sweating as he worked, and he did not think about the ball anymore. He was too focused on getting the work done as he was quite tired already. Every now and then, he'd stop to wipe his brow, take a swig of water, and glance at the progress he had made. Yet he would soon find that to all be in vain. Stephen had planned to roll the ball even further away from his field at the end of the day, but as the moment came, he was really too tired and he decided to leave it there overnight. He would deal with it tomorrow. Collapsing into his favorite chair with a sigh, he figured whatever mystery the ball held could wait one more day. Tonight, rest was his priority. Later that evening, as he looked through the window to admire the sunset, he saw the ball again. He decided to try and find some information about it online, but he still had no idea what it was. The glow of the setting sun made the ball appear almost otherworldly, reigniting his curiosity. With a reluctant determination, he booted up his old computer. He wasn't very good with the internet, and with his lack of knowledge, he had no clue how to look for it either. His search proved futile. Typing with hesitant fingers, Stephen tried various combinations of words in the search bar, but all he got were results about sports or celestial events. Frustrated and feeling out of his depth, he finally shut the computer down. The mystery of the ball would have to remain unsolved for now, but definitely not for long. Not much later, Stephen turned off his computer and went to bed. It had been a long, exhausting day, and his bed was calling. As he lay down, he noticed his hands were itching slightly, probably from all the hard work, he thought. Deciding it was nothing a good night's sleep couldn't fix, he closed his eyes, letting the day's mysteries drift away as sleep took over. The next morning, he woke up and did his normal morning routine. The sun was shining through the curtains, promising another day of hard work. Everything seemed perfectly normal as he made his coffee and looked out over his fields from the kitchen window, yet the sight he saw hadn't been what he expected. Stephen immediately went outside to take a closer look. As he walked onto his fields, his eyes widened in shock at the sight before him. Patches of withered and dying plants were where rows of healthy crops should have been. The sight was jarring against the backdrop of what should have been a typical, productive morning. Because of his old age, he couldn't run anymore, but he walked to his fields as fast as his legs would carry him. His eyes filled with tears as he stood next to them. The damage was extensive, more than he could have imagined. It felt like each withered plant was a direct blow to his heart. The fruits of his labor turned to dust. So many crops had died, and a part of the field was completely ruined. Stephen stood amid what was once a source of pride and sustenance, now a testament to destruction. He couldn't understand how this had happened overnight. The ball. Could it have been the cause? The thought chilled him to the bone as he surveyed the damage, feeling a deep sense of loss and confusion. "Oh, what's happened here?" Stephen muttered to himself as he walked through the fields, his eyes scanning the ruined crops. His hands, rough and used to the soil, trembled slightly as he touched the withered plants. All that work, all that care, gone. His voice trailed off as he thought about the financial pinch this would put him in. It was more than loss. It was a blow to his spirit. Kneeling among the rows, Stephen picked up a frail stem. Nothing left to save. he said, half to himself, half to the wind. He pulled at a plant and it disintegrated in his hands. No use, he sighed. The ground, normally a source of life, now lay barren before him, a silent testament to the sudden destruction. Arms aching but determined, Stephen started clearing out the dead crops. "Can't let this spread," he grumbled as he worked, dragging the dead plants to a pile at the field's edge. Every so often, he'd stop, wipe his brow, and look out over the surviving greens. "Got to protect these guys," he spoke to the crops, hoping his efforts weren't in vain. Why now? Why like this? Stephen pondered aloud while pulling up another lifeless plant. The randomness of the destruction baffled him. No bugs, no usual signs of disease, just dead crops. "Makes no sense," he declared to the empty fields, frustration colouring his voice as he tossed another handful of dead leaves to the ground. After the field was cleared, Stephen leaned on his shovel, catching his breath. He gazed towards where the ball lay, now even more suspicious than before. That thing. What if it... He paused, the connection forming slowly in his mind. He shook his head, disbelief and concern mingling. "Could it really have been you?" he asked the silent sphere, a mix of accusation and curiosity in his eyes. Walking the path he'd rolled the ball the previous day, Stephen's heart sank. Each patch of dead crops aligned perfectly with the ball's journey across his field. "Can't be a coincidence," he murmured, noting how the trail of withered plants marked the ball's route. This chilling pattern sparked a fire in him. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "This ends today," Stephen resolved, squaring his shoulders as he approached the mysterious sphere once more. His determination grew with each step towards the ball. He remembered how the soil looked dead around it, confirming his fears. "You won't ruin me," he vowed, heading back to his shed with a plan forming in his mind. Stephen rummaged through his tools in the dim light of his shed, the metallic clinks echoing off the walls as he selected what he needed. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding," he thought, grabbing a hammer and a pickaxe. With tools in hand, he felt a surge of resolve. Whatever was inside that ball, he was about to find out. Stephen returned to the ball, his tools heavy in his hands, but his resolve even heavier. He set down his arsenal and took a deep breath. The hammer felt right in his grip, familiar and dependable. "All right, let's do this," he said to himself, lifting the pickaxe. He was ready to break open the mystery that threatened his livelihood. With a determined swing, Stephen struck the surface of the ball with the pickaxe. The sound of metal against the strange material rang out, sharp and loud in the quiet field. He hit again, harder this time, his actions fueled by a mix of fear and necessity. "Come on, show me what you're made of," he urged, poised for another strike. As Stephen raised the pickaxe again, a wave of doubt washed over him. What if it's dangerous? He paused, lowering the tool. The thought that the ball could be harmful, more than just to his crops, suddenly seemed very real. "Better safe than sorry," he muttered, deciding it was wise to get some advice before proceeding. With that, he left his tools by the ball and set off. Stephen made his way to his neighbours, explaining the situation and showing them pictures of the ball on his phone. "Ever seen anything like this?" he asked each of them. Their puzzled faces and negative replies didn't offer much comfort, but they all agreed to keep an eye out. "Thanks, I appreciate it," he said, feeling somewhat relieved but still unsettled by their lack of recognition. Walking back to his farm, Stephen noticed his hands were itching worse than before, now with a burning sensation that made him wince. "What now?" he groaned, inspecting his reddening skin. The itching was relentless, becoming a painful reminder of his unknown adversary in the field. With each step home, the discomfort grew, urging him to hurry. Once inside, Stephen headed straight for the sink, washing his hands under cold water, hoping to ease the itch and burn. "What's happening to me?" he worried, watching the water turn murky from the dirt and whatever else might have been on his hands. After drying them, he found some lotion and applied it liberally, seeking any relief from the relentless irritation. The lotion provided some temporary comfort, but Stephen's mind was racing with questions. "What is that thing? And what's it doing to me?" he pondered, looking at his hands. The redness subsided a bit, but the concern remained. He knew he'd have to find answers soon, but for now, he could only wait and hope the other farmers might come through with some clue. After a moment of thought, Stephen went to the shed and grabbed a pair of sturdy gloves. Not taking any more chances, he said to himself, pulling them on. The fabric felt rough against his skin, a minor discomfort, but a necessary precaution. With his hands protected, he felt a renewed sense of determination. "Let's get to the bottom of this," he declared, heading back to the mysterious ball. Standing before the ball again, Stephen's irritation resurfaced. Memories of his ruined crops fueled his resolve. "You've caused enough trouble," he grumbled, raising his tools. He began striking the ball, each hit echoing his frustration. The sound of metal against the strange material filled the air, a testament to his determination to uncover the truth behind the destruction of his livelihood. With every strike, a peculiar odor grew stronger, wafting through the air. Stephen wrinkled his nose, the smell unpleasant and unfamiliar. "What is that?" he wondered aloud, pausing momentarily. The stench seemed to emanate from the ball itself, growing more pungent with each blow. It was unlike anything he'd encountered on his farm before, a worrying sign of the ball's mysterious nature. Continuing his assault on the ball, Stephen didn't realize its true nature until it was too late. With one final, forceful strike, the ball cracked open. The realization of what he had been hitting, of what had been hiding inside, hit him a split second too late. His heart sank as the contents of the ball became apparent, a sinking feeling of dread filling him. As the ball split open, Stephen recoiled in horror. Countless dead bugs and insects spilled out, covering the ground around him. "Oh no, no, no!" he exclaimed, a scream escaping his lips as he stumbled backwards. The sight was too much. It sent shivers down his spine. Without another thought, he turned and ran as fast as his legs would carry him, desperate to escape the nightmare that had just unfolded before his eyes. Stephen bolted to his house, slamming the door behind him as he headed straight for the bathroom. Without pausing, he jumped into the shower fully clothed, the shock of cold water hitting him suddenly. His breath caught in his throat, but the urgency of washing away whatever might have clung to him from the ball overpowered his discomfort. Under the relentless stream of water, Stephen slowly and carefully began removing his clothes, each piece soaked and sticking to his skin. His movements were methodical, driven by a need to cleanse every possible trace of the ordeal. As the clothes piled up on the shower floor, so did his worries, swirling down the drain with the water. Stephen scrubbed his body thoroughly, paying extra attention to his hands, which still burned and itched intensely. "Gotta get it all off," he muttered to himself, his skin reddening under the hot water and rough washcloth. The burning sensation seemed to fade a bit with each scrub, giving him a small sense of relief amidst the chaos. After the shower, Stephen dressed in clean clothes and sat heavily on his bed, his mind racing. "Someone did this on purpose," he concluded, piecing together the events. The realization that this was no accident but a deliberate act meant to harm him and his farm weighed heavily on him. He had many questions, but his resolve hardened with each one. He would find the culprit. Determination set in his jaw, Stephen stood up from the bed. "I'm going to find out who did this," he vowed, a fire kindling within him. The thought of someone targeting him and his livelihood sparked a fierce desire for justice. Revenge might not be in his nature, but protection certainly was, and he was ready to defend his life's work against whoever threatened it. Armed with a new sense of caution, Stephen donned a thick worker's suit and pulled on heavy gloves before venturing back out to his fields. The morning air was cool against his covered skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of his racing heart. He was determined to handle this situation carefully, making sure nothing from that dangerous ball could harm him further. Once he reached the remnants of the ball, Stephen carefully gathered every piece, sealing them into a heavy-duty bag. He carried the bag back to his shed, placing it far from any sunlight and potential prying eyes. "Out of sight for now," he murmured, securing the shed door behind him. It felt like a temporary solution, but necessary until he could figure out the next steps. Reaching out to his network of farming friends proved more fruitful this time. After several conversations and a few pointed questions, it came to light that Joshua, one of his competitors, might be involved. "Joshua made that ball," one friend confided after some hesitation. The news was a blow to Stephen, stirring a mix of betrayal and resolve within him. Joshua's farm bordered Stephen's, and it was no secret that Joshua's business had been struggling. Despite their proximity and shared profession, there was an unspoken rivalry that had never before boiled over into malice. Stephen thought back to their interactions, trying to reconcile the helpful neighbour with the desperate competitor who might resort to sabotage. Stephen couldn't believe it, especially as he had talked to him before. Earlier that day, Stephen had confronted Joshua, needing to hear the truth from him directly. "I didn't do anything with that ball, Stephen. I swear, I've never seen it before." Joshua's voice was firm, his eyes steady. Despite the evidence, there was a part of Stephen that wanted to believe him, torn between the instincts of a neighbour and the suspicions of a victim. That had been a lie. Joshua had indeed crafted the ball himself, disguising it to blend seamlessly with the crops. Inside, he had filled it with a potent poison calculated to kill any plant it touched. Stephen pieced together the truth from clues and whispers among the community. The betrayal stung, deepening the rift between the once friendly neighbours. Without confronting Joshua again, Stephen took a drastic step. Under the cover of dusk, he scattered the pieces of the toxic ball across Joshua's fields. Each fragment was a seed of destruction, sown with a heavy heart but firm resolve. "If my fields suffer, so will his," Stephen thought grimly, the weight of his actions heavy on his shoulders. The next morning, the devastation was apparent. Joshua's fields, once vibrant and thriving, were now a landscape of death. As the sun rose, revealing the extent of the damage, Joshua's despair was palpable. There was no saving the crops. It was too late. The poison had done its work, more thoroughly and quickly than even Stephen had anticipated. Furious, Joshua confronted Stephen, his face contorted with anger. "You need to pay for this, Stephen! What have you done?" he demanded, his voice thick with accusation. Stephen met his gaze with feigned ignorance, shrugging lightly. "I really don't know what you're talking about, Joshua," he said coolly, maintaining his composure. Inside, however, his conscience wrestled with the morality of his actions. Eventually, Joshua stormed off, muttering curses and kicking at the dead crops. His frustration echoed in his departing yells, aimed at no one and everyone. Stephen watched him go, the distance between their farms now mirrored in their estrangement. The quiet that followed was filled with mixed emotions. Satisfaction at justice served, yet unease about the future of their farms and their fractured relationship. Luckily, the other farmers were disgusted by Joshua's actions. They rallied around Stephen, offering not just their sympathy, but also their support. "We can't let one bad seed ruin the bunch," they said, making it clear where they stood. Their unity was a balm to Stephen's troubled spirit, and he was grateful for their generosity in such trying times. To help Stephen recover from the loss, his fellow farmers lent him some of their modern machinery. These tools were a far cry from what Stephen was used to, featuring the latest technology in farming. With these machines, he could harvest and plant much faster, helping him to quickly make up for the lost crops and potentially save his season. With the community's help and the new equipment at his disposal, Stephen managed to not only salvage the season, but also turn a profit. The efficiency of the modern machinery combined with his hard-earned farming skills proved to be a successful mix. "Couldn't have done it without you all," he often said, heartfelt gratitude colouring his words. Meanwhile, Joshua's situation worsened. With no way to save his crops or restore his farm to its former glory, he was forced to make a tough decision. Eventually, he sold his farm, leaving the community he had once been a part of. The land was passed on to others who hoped to cleanse it of the past and start anew. Stephen continued to work his farm with joy and dedication for a few more years, buoyed by the support of his community and the success he had managed to maintain. When he finally decided to retire, it was with a sense of fulfillment and pride. He left his farm in capable hands, content that he had overcome the challenges and ended his career on a high note.
If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone who may find it interesting. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.